Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, A Day in the Life of a Government Affairs Professional at Boehringer Ingelheim. This webinar is a part of an ongoing webinar series on careers in bioscience produced by BioCT in partnership with the Yukon Center for Career Development. My name is Lisa McGuire, and I'm with the Yukon Center for Career Development. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see your attendee interface on your computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Note that today's presentation is being recorded and will be provided within 48 hours. I'd now like to introduce Dawn Hocevar, President and CEO of BioCT. She will introduce our guest presenter for today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Hocevar, President and CEO of BioCT. BioCT is Connecticut's voice for the bioscience industry in the state. We work with all aspects of the ecosystem to assist with collaboration between government, academia, industry to create, grow, and retain talent and companies in Connecticut. This monthly webinar series is focused on careers in industry, the types of jobs needed, and personal stories on career paths and skills needed. Please check BioCT's career portal for jobs and recordings of these webinars and sign up for news alerts to stay on top of industry activity at www.bioct.org. Today, we will hear from Jennifer Hurst, who is the Regional Director for the East Region at Boehringer Ingelheim. Jennifer works at Boehringer Ingelheim State Government Affairs Group, covering the Northeast states, and focuses on Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, and Vermont. She is responsible for influencing public policy affecting the industry at the state level. Jennifer, thank you for being here, and now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dawn and Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to everyone for joining. I'm really excited to share about what I do in the bioscience industry with all of you this morning. I really enjoy my job, and I think it's rather unique in the bioscience space, especially for folks thinking about what you want your next career move to be. So with that, I'll get started. I just wanted to share one quick housekeeping item. I know Lisa mentioned in her opening that you can type messages and ask questions during the presentation. I would encourage all of you to do that. I think it'll be more interesting for you and for me if we communicate throughout, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. So with that, today I thought I'd share a few different things. First, a little bit about Boehringer Ingelheim, where I currently work. Then I will get into my job and what I do every day as a lobbyist for BI. And then I'll share how I got to my current position and my path that I took. And then finally, how that relates back to you folks, and certainly any questions you have about your interest in this type of career path. So BI is a family-owned company. As you can probably guess from the name, it's a German company, and we are headquartered over in Germany. However, our U.S. headquarters are in Ridgefield and Danbury. It kind of slices right through our campus, which is quite large out in that neck of the woods. As a family-owned company, that means that we're not publicly traded, which is pretty unique for the space, and I think sets us apart from some of our peers in the area. We reinvest a lot back into R&D, about 20% back into research and development for our company, which is really exciting. And I think given that we're a family-owned company, it allows us to do that. So what we focus in on is human and animal health products. I'll get into a little bit of that just briefly so you know what we do. On the human side, we focus on primary care. So what you would go see your PCP for. Diabetes, respiratory type diseases are really our bread and butter in the company. Like many other biopharma companies, we also have pieces of immuno-oncology. We actually recently had a new research lab in Ridgefield focusing in on that, which is really exciting, as well as a space in rare disease. So I think those two lines really talk to the direction that a lot of pharma companies are taking right now, which is into that personal medicine space. Very exciting area to talk to legislators about and to other policy groups about, and I think just really exciting for everyone. The other piece I'll mention is we have an office. We have offices, throughout the country, but one particular in Cambridge, and that houses our venture fund, which basically means it's the group that partners with startup companies who have a new innovative idea, and we want to team up with them to try to get that idea off the ground. On the animal health side, we recently merged with another animal health company, and so our portfolio is quite large at this point. We don't do antibiotics, but instead we focus on a lot of preventive care, so vaccines and things of that nature. So, that's a kind of a quick overview of BI. I'm happy to take any questions on that, but I'm going to pivot from that to really talking more about what I do for BI. And I thought it would be helpful to understand where lobbyists sit within a company. So at BI, the government affairs team is housed within the legal department. And this is pretty common for most pharma companies. They certainly could be housed in like communications or other groups, but I think the legal department makes a lot of sense for reasons we'll talk about later. But basically, they can be a helpful arm to analyze legislation or other bills that are put forward. Within the government affairs team, it's broken out into really 3 different areas. So first, the team that I serve on is the state government affairs team, and we have lobbyists throughout the country that cover different regions. We have a federal lobbying team, and they are focused in DC and on the federal side, for Congress and federal agencies. And then we have a policy team. And the policy team are folks that really help both the state and federal team do our job. They analyze bills for us. They analyze policy that will help us to do our job better and figure out how different bills will impact BI. So it's really just like 3 pieces of a stool. We all need each other to make a successful team. So what is lobbying? That was kind of the background of BI and where we fit in. But what is what I actually do every day? So in the preparation for this meeting, I was searching around a bit and I found this example, and I thought it was, really good analogy for what I do every day. So imagine you're a kid, you're 7 or 8, and what does every kid want? They want a puppy. So, what do you do? I feel like, and having 2 little ones myself, I feel like sometimes kids are just little lobbyists in the making. They figure out who the decision makers are, oftentimes your parents. They sometimes, once they figure out, okay, mom and dad are ones that are going to decide that whether I can get a puppy or not, then they go to others to kind of build this little coalition of folks to try to achieve the result that they want. So they'll go to their grandparents and say, hey, I want a puppy. Can you help me tell mom and dad I should get a puppy? Or they'll go to like their parents' friends or a neighbor and say, hey, I want a puppy. Will you tell my mom or dad to get me a puppy? And say they build this little group up of a coalition to try to help convince their parents. And then what do they do next? They know their facts. They tell their story. They say, hey, mom and dad, I'm a good kid. I'm going to take care of it. They try to figure out, what argument's going to work best. They tell their mom it's going to teach me responsibility. They tell their dad, you had a kid when you had a dog when you were a kid. I want one too. And they kind of throw out all these arguments and figure out which ones stick, like which ones resonate more with mom or dad. And you'll notice they kind of go after those a little bit harder. So I think this is a really good simplified example of what lobbyists do. I mean, obviously it's on a much smaller scale, but many of the pieces fall into line with what I do for BI, most days. So, in essence, a lobbyist is hiring an expert to help you get the puppy. When you have a large, company, there are sure to be different priorities that you have and different pieces of legislation that you want either passed or not passed. So for example, right now, pharma is really, or biopharma companies are not, I don't think, viewed very kindly in the public eye. And so, oftentimes lobbyists for pharma companies are really trying to refocus and reframe that reputation to make sure folks know all the good things that we're doing and not just hearing those same lines repeated in the media or elsewhere that, that we're not acting appropriately. So this happens in a number of ways. How do you become that expert? First and foremost really is relationship building. Lobbyists are successful when they build strong relationships with legislators and when they build relationships with other lobbyists. So, as an expert in this area, what you're trying to do is to know your audience, understand who that is, and then get to know them really well and have them get to know you. The next thing is analyzing the politics. And as I mentioned, pharma right now has a lot of challenges that it's facing from a PR perspective. But there's much more to any situation than just that overarching challenge. So when you have a bill in front of you, there's an individual. Someone ask a question? So if you have a bill in front of you, you're trying to figure out, who is the person or group interested in this bill? And I'll take it down to a state level. There's an individual legislator who introduced that bill. And why did that person introduce the bill? I mean, it could be for a constituent issue. It could be someone that they know in their local town that wants a certain problem taken care of. It could have been a campaign promise that they made when they were trying to get elected for office. You have to figure out what their motivation is for passing the bill on that individual level. Then you need to also analyze it within the larger spectrum of the state. So for example, right now in Connecticut, there's a larger budgetary issue going on, and any bill that we work on has to be viewed in that larger general political environment that's happening right now in the state for Connecticut. And then finally, for the politics, you want to analyze, what the goal is. So one of the bills I'm working on quite often in a number of states requires transparency of pharmaceutical companies. And understanding the goal, which is that legislators want to make healthcare more affordable for patients, helps me to understand how I can work with them. That's a common goal that BIs, along with a number of other companies, share. So, we can say to legislators, I understand the politics of this. I understand, what your ultimate goal is. Let's work together so we can find a way to reach that. Moving to the next bucket is the decision makers. You have to understand who you're trying to convince in order to make your case. So, if you have a bill with a particular legislator introduced, you have to know if that bill is really something that they want, or is that something that a certain leadership wants, or a certain public interest group wants. Who are the people that are really pushing for a particular policy to be passed? And that is key to how you figure out how to move forward. And then finally, I would say being knowledgeable and being a resource. This is really what lobbyists, I would say, bring to the table. So when you get elected as, a state legislator, for example, you are, a regular person just like me or you, and you are thrown into this position where you're asked for your opinion on a really diverse range of topics. So you're someone from, let's say, where I live in West Hartford, you just got elected, and now you're asked for your opinion on, energy issues and childcare regulations and environmental policy, all these things that you may have never even contemplated prior to getting elected. And so that's where lobbyists come in, because what we do is share our knowledge of our particular industry with the legislators. And that allows them to do their job and make a decision. So I think lobbyists often kind of get this bad rap, that going back to that first slide I had up with the cartoon of that we, make decisions or make things up for legislators. But what we really do is provide them with a resource so that they can make, hopefully, a more informed decision on their own about any given policy. And I think that that's obviously the key. And being a good lobbyist means that a legislator will come to you proactively to ask you about a certain topic area. So here I just wanted to share a few buckets of the government affairs world. So, government affairs happens on a number of different levels, and I think you could certainly make a career in any of these buckets. First you have your local policymakers. So now that I wrote stores, I think maybe it's actually Mansfield up in Connecticut that makes the local decision. So this is like, licensing dogs. How are you going to license them? Visit them online or in person? Decisions that really impact the day-to-day lives of people in the area. And there are a lot of lobbyists who work at that level on a number of issues near and dear. So there is citing and zoning issues, building codes, things of that nature that are really important. And I'll speak later to how that also impacts BI and how I do a little bit of that too. The next level where I spend my time is on the state level. And on this level, decisions are made, I would say, in a little bit more of a detailed and holistic way. So, example here that impacts pharma companies is that, elected state legislators will decide who gets to benefit from Medicaid. So they'll figure out who the pool of Medicaid beneficiaries are. They'll make that decision, and that will become state law. And then after that, they'll move to a regulatory space, and then they'll figure out what the covered services of that Medicaid population will be. So you can see the state kind of takes it up a notch to a little bit larger scale. And then the third bucket is federal. And federal lobbying, I think, is what most people think of when they think of lobbyists. So this is going to Congress and the president and federal trade agencies, and federal agencies such as the FTC to talk about policy. I'm obviously slightly biased since I am a state lobbyist, but I would say I find state lobbying to be really exciting because it moves very quickly, and there is a lot to do on a number of different arenas, which I find really exciting, whereas sometimes I think the feds move a bit slower. I'll pause now. I think there's a question. Lisa, would you mind reading it out loud for everyone?
I don't mind at all, Jennifer. From Lydia is asking, is negotiation and training important for achieving all 4 of these goals, or do you mostly learn how to lobby on the job?
So I think so. And I'll talk a little bit more about my career path as we go on. But I went to law school, and so in law school they do some training on negotiation tactics. And I think that that is certainly helpful and something that you would need to learn. But I think it's a little bit more straightforward than like movies or things like that make it out to be, where you're kind of, you know, holding your side or pretending you have more to give than you really do, which of course some of that happens. But I think it really is on the job relationship development that would help more than like a negotiation class, because how you work in that space is heavily dependent on the personalities that you're working with, as opposed to like a more of a pure contract negotiation. That was a really good question, though. Thank you. So that was like perfect, because this, you know, leads right into where I hope we can have, you know, more of a discussion, and that's what lobbying skills are. So I'd say number 1, 2, and 3 is trustworthiness. When you're a lobbyist, your word really is everything. A lot of lobbying, you know, I'd say is formal sit-down meetings where you go into a legislator's office and you have a very detailed discussion about a specific bill, and you give feedback. And that happens, you know, I would say consistently. But the heart of lobbying is really the one-off conversations that are not planned, that are very informal, that happen in the hallways of state capitals. They happen at other types of events. For example, you know, BI is a member of the Danbury Chamber of Commerce. And when I go to those meetings, I often see legislators there. And so this is where a lot of the, I would say, quote unquote, real lobbying happens. When you have brief conversations with legislators, when they ask you a question about a bill, or they ask you a question about a policy topic, and you have to be prepared, which goes into my next goal of being knowledgeable. You have to be prepared to answer the question accurately, and make sure that they can trust exactly what you say. And to that effect, if you do not know the answer, you know, oftentimes I will say, listen, I don't know off the top of my head, I will get back to you. And making sure you get back to them in a timely way is also important. Your reputation is everything. And I know there have certainly been lobbyists who, you know, legislators just won't work with, because they feel as though they lied to them once, or they feel as though they misled them once, which may or may not be true. But the bottom line of that situation is they no longer view that lobbyist as a resource. So this really is a real key to being an effective lobbyist, is to make sure people can trust you. And I think that goes not only to what you say, but how you act and how you treat folks. The second one here is your knowledge. So I touched on this a bit before, but this really can't be overemphasized. You know, legislators in some states are part-time legislators. So they have a full-time job outside the Capitol building, and they come there when they can to vote on different issues or speak their mind. And there are so many problems and challenges facing them. There's no way for them to have a strong grasp on it all. And the last thing you want to have happen is to have your legislator Googling, you know, what does pharma mean, or what's BI, which I have had happened in front of me before, where legislators, you know, Google a word to try to figure out what it means. Instead, you want them to say to you, hey, you know, can you tell me about what's that new immuno-oncology thing? Like, what's that all about? What does that mean for us? And so you want to be that resource for them, that when they have a question, they think of you and come to you. And then secondly, when you're in a meeting with them, that you're able to answer all the questions that they have for you. And that can be quite challenging. There are typically some off-the-wall questions, but that's also what makes it, you know, a fun and enjoyable day, I would say, at the same time. which leads into my next point, which is that you have to be able to enjoy politics and policy. So this is a space that is unlike many others. Politics obviously plays into all of the decisions they make in a given day, as well as policy goals. And you have to really enjoy that space. This is not a typical office environment. This is very unique, where sometimes rules of common sense or order or any of those things are not at play, but the rules of politics are. So you have to really be able to embrace that and enjoy it and relish in that, because otherwise it would be a very frustrating place for you. And to that end, flexibility. So I'll talk a little bit later about my path, but I was a traditional lawyer for many years before I became a lobbyist. And one of the things I enjoy about lobbying is that no 2 days are the same. There's constant change. There's change within a given day, and you have to be flexible and nimble to be able to adopt those changes quickly. So, you could be up at the state capitol and have 3 meetings planned with legislators to discuss a very important bill, and it would not be crazy to say that all those 3 meetings would get canceled while you're there the same day, but you'll have the opportunity to meet with 2 other legislators that you weren't even planning to meet with, and those 2 meetings, may turn out to be even more important. So you have to be able to think on your feet, be flexible, and go with the flow of it. The next thing I want to point out is people skills. So state legislators come in all stripes. I mean, certainly there are different political parties and different policy views, but there are just folks from all different backgrounds and experiences in life, and you have to be able to get along with people to be effective. If you can't kind of go with the flow in a conversation, it's going to be very challenging, because state legislators are there because they were elected to serve their constituencies, and they want to make sure they voice their opinions on policy. And sitting and listening to that, if that doesn't intrigue you, can make for a long day. So I'd certainly say making sure you can get along with all different types of folks is key. And then understanding what drives people. So to be an effective lobbyist, you need to know why somebody is proposing the bill they're proposing or the policy they're proposing. So thinking about what drives that individual and what makes people tick is really an important trait. You have to be interested in individuals and in their personal experiences. The next up one is patience. And I think you can kind of see from this, it's a lot of soft skills, I would say, but patience is so key. I mean, there could be days at many state capitals where hours go by and you're waiting for a particular legislator or policymaker to become available so you can have, your 30-second pitch to them about a particular bill. And that takes a lot of patience to wait and make sure that you get the opportunity to talk to them directly. And which leads into my last one, which is just frankly a little bit of stalking. So, a lot of my family and friends joke that I've been stalking people since high school. if you like to do kind of things with your friends in high school as I did, this came in to be a very key part of my adult life as well. So, you have to make sure you put yourself in a position where you have the opportunity to see certain legislators. So knowing where their meetings are, knowing what other outside groups or interests that they have, where you could also, add support to so that you could interact with them there. That's all a really important part of being successful. So I'll pause there for a second. As I mentioned, I know that these are a lot of the soft skills, I would say, that people would talk about, but this really drives home just kind of the uniqueness of the lobbying world.
Jennifer, we did have a question wondering, and you may be going to get to it further into the presentation, but is a law degree needed? You mentioned that you pick up those training and negotiation skills in law school, but what if somebody doesn't have a law degree?
Yes, I'll skip to my path now, and then we can go back to a day in the life in a second. So to answer your question, no. I do not think you need a law degree to be a lobbyist. That being said, I would say many lobbyists are lawyers. And, certainly it's helpful to be able to analyze a proposed bill with a critical eye toward legal analysis, but that's certainly not a requirement. I can give the example that actually the woman that heads up BI's State Government Affairs Group is actually a scientist by training. I think that there are folks with really diverse backgrounds that come into the lobbying world. So certainly don't let that be a hurdle. So my personal path, though, of course, as I say that, I did go through law school. As a younger kid, throughout high school, I volunteered for political campaigns. I always found them interesting and exciting and fun. And I think that's kind of where I got my first taste of interest in the policy world. After high school, I knew I loved politics, and so I went to George Washington in DC. I wanted to be a part of that world, and I absolutely loved it, but unfortunately, I couldn't afford it, so I transferred back to UConn here in Connecticut, and I had an awesome experience there. As an undergrad, my goal was to focus just on political science, but I had a incredibly supportive, we'll call the person, professor who told me that political science was not a real major and that I need to add something to it. So hence I add economics. I did not enjoy 1 second of it, and I think I barely got through it, but I had graduated somehow with a double degree in economics and poli-sci. I don't think that advice was true or accurate, looking in hindsight now, but as 19-year-old, I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to be successful if I didn't add something else to my repertoire. So at UConn, I continued my interest in government. I volunteered for campaigns, but what I think I did, looking back now, was I did a lot of internships. So there were different opportunities through UConn to intern at the state capitol in Hartford, and I did that. I also interned for different state agencies and got a taste of what that was. And I think that all just made me, really tuned into policy and politics. But even at that point, it never dawned on me to be a lobbyist. I didn't even know what a lobbyist was, I don't think. After UConn undergrad, I went straight to law school because I certainly didn't know what the heck else to do, not for any real good reason. And at law school, I continued to volunteer for campaigns. I continued to intern, and now I even sometimes got paid to work at state agencies, which was really exciting. And I worked at a really diverse range of agencies, from zoning agencies to state election agencies to economic and community development agencies. So I really just did anything I could to get my hands on some policy. And I would say every topic becomes more interesting the more you know about it. Just kind of keeping my options open and being open to any opportunity that came my way. So after law school, I, as you can imagine, was saddled with an insane amount of debt. So I did what I think most law school graduates think they're supposed to do, and I went to work at a big law firm. I worked at Brown Rudnick in Hartford doing commercial real estate, of all things. And I did that for about 4.5 years. as I mentioned before, that was a challenge for me because you had to sit in the same office, looking at the same computer, doing basically the same contract, day after day. So I thought to myself, like, I don't want to keep doing this crazy hours, working nights and weekends and everything in between. So I moved to a smaller law firm in Hartford, thinking that that would make me happier, which it didn't. So I was still, the same office, the same computer, the same contracts. And at that point is when a cousin of mine suggested to me that I might like being a lobbyist. And I said, well, I don't even know what a lobbyist is. And I remember her saying to me, oh, they talk a lot. You like talking. That'll be good for you. So I was like, all right, let's go figure out this lobbying thing. And what I did from there was just a ton of networking. I met with anyone I could that was a lobbyist to tell them I wanted to be a lobbyist and ask them who else I should meet with. And lo and behold, that led to my first lobbying job, which was with CBIA, the Connecticut Business Industry Association. And for them, I lobbied on issues related to healthcare from the employer's perspective. And that was my first foray into the Connecticut Capitol and getting to know legislators and the process and all that's entailed with lobbying. And then I was at CBIA for about, I think, again, 4.5, 5 years. And then I came to BI. And at BI, I actually cover a region of states, which has been a new and exciting challenge. So instead of just focusing on one state and trying to get that policy together, I focus on a number of states in trying to push policy forward. So I thought, I'm just jumping back for a second, because I thought it would be interesting to see what a day is like for a lobbyist. So I did a little rundown of what a typical day is like for me. And I think this goes to your enjoyment of flexibility and having every day be different. In the morning, I mentioned I have 2 little ones. It's pure craziness. I usually get started around 9 a.m. I would love to say I get started earlier, but it's just not reality. And, typical day, I'm out in the car. This particular example, I share that I'm going to Massachusetts to have some legislative meetings. So in the car, I'll take a call with a different trade group to get a bill update. I'll get to Boston. I'll meet with the chair of the health committee. And this is a good example of relationship building. So in Boston, for example, there is a new chair of the health committee. So I want to go ahead and meet with that individual so I can build a relationship with her. So when I do need something, it's not the first time she's seeing me. I'll have some more meetings at the state capitol with different legislators. Around noon, I'll have a call with our policy team to discuss a different bill and have them tell me whether it's good or bad or somewhere in the middle, what we can do to try to change it. Then you have some more meetings with legislators, often a working lunch with other lobbyists. It's really important to make friends with your fellow lobbyists because sharing information with them is a critical part of being able to do your job well. And then after that, I'll usually leave trying to miss traffic to get home to Connecticut. Once again, I'll be on the phone with one of BI's contract lobbyists. So we also hire lobbyists to help us in some of our priority states. And so I'll be talking to them about what they're doing, what they're seeing, and figuring out strategy moving forward. Then I mentioned there are some local issues as well for my job. So, for example, we have a large campus in Ridgefield, and there are local issues that pop up, either with construction or some of our abutting neighbors, things of that nature. And I have to work with local first selectmen and mayors of Ridgefield and Danbury to make sure, everyone's happy with us. And then I put those little nuggets to bed. And then after that, this is certainly one of the challenges of a job like this. there's a ton of email. So if you're a lobbyist doing your job right, you are out and about for the entire day doing work, and then you have to come home and still go through, the mountain of email that you get during the day and try to reply to everyone, which I will certainly disclose I do not always achieve. But anyways, it's a really fun day. I find it's something different in every meeting. Meet a ton of new people that have a diverse set of opinions, and it makes it really exciting. So, to break this down, like, what does this mean for you? As I mentioned, lots of lobbyists are lawyers, but you do not need to be one at all. It's certainly not a requirement. If you are interested in lobbying, I think reaching out to your local legislator and asking them if you can shadow them in their office for a day to kind of get a sense of what happens and how they operate would be a great place to start. Another option is a policy group. So there are lobbyists for every stripe of life. And, given your often scientific backgrounds, you certainly could find a policy group for a certain disease state or for a certain environmental issue. And you could reach out to them and say, hey, I'm interested in lobbying. Can you tell me more what you do, or could I help out? And I think, just to kind of throw out two ideas, if you're interested, those would be ways to get started and kind of break into the industry a bit. And that sums up what I have for today. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions or any comments folks have.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. There was another comment or question. In terms of getting, like, some companies get some sort of financial package sometimes from a state, or you need a law changed or something. Can you briefly kind of go over the process if you need a law that's not being proposed, that's already a law, what you would do to get that changed or to get some sort of financial incentive from the state?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what you would do typically, if you were BI, for example, you would go to your local delegation. So for BI, we would go to the legislators that represent Ridgefield and Danbury and say, hey, this change is really important to us. Can you help us get this passed? And more likely than not, they would say, sure. And we'd hope that they propose a bill. And then once a bill is proposed, we would try to build a coalition of other folks who are also interested in this topic. So if it is, let's say, for economic development purposes, for example, we would look to other companies and see, hey, are you also interested in a program like this? Will you join our coalition? And in that way, try to reach out to more legislators to get more of the decision makers on board with that new policy. And then from there, we would hope, it works through the process and eventually is adopted. I don't want to go too long, but that's how we get started.
Thank you. Another question from Vanessa is, what do you find to be the most rewarding and most challenging part of your job?
So the most rewarding, I would say, is when, you can see a bill that you've worked on, that you really believe in, make it all the way through the process, become adopted into law. I think that's why most lobbyists do this. They really enjoy pushing policies that they believe in. I find that to be incredibly thrilling. I'm also a competitive person, so kind of like the win, I'd say, is very thrilling for me. And the most challenging part of the job, I think, is just like anything else, the balance. I mean, there's always something to do, as there are many jobs, and the travel and all of that can certainly be challenging at times, but thankfully the good seems to outweigh the bad in that respect.
You mentioned that most of your days are different. Every day is different, I think you said. Do you find that, so the most rewarding thing is when you get a bill passed, do you find that you have repetitive, same kind of thing coming up year after year after year?
So I think there's certainly an aspect of that of repetition. So you'll often see similar bills come up year after year, or similar problems come up year after year. I think a way to combat that is to try to go at it in a different way. You're always going to have certain legislators that just don't like the industry that you're in, or don't like the particular group you're working for, and so they're going to file bills that are there to frustrate you. And so you have to try to look at it through a new lens, or try to approach it in a new way to keep it exciting, I think. But I would say overall, since every year is different from a political perspective, given what's going on in the state or on the federal level, no two issues are really ever exactly the same.
Thank you. Christina is asking, what's the typical career path for lobbyists? Do lobbyists traditionally stay in lobbying roles?
So I think that you have the vast majority of lobbyists, I think, do stay in lobbying roles. So lobbyists not only work for large companies like myself, so I work directly for BI, but there also are lobbyists that work for law firms, let's say, and they have a number of clients. So, for example, we contract with a law firm here in Connecticut, and they have a number of clients that they work for at the state capitol. So, I think that there are different avenues within lobbying. If you want to work directly for a trade group, or you want to work as a lobbyist and have a myriad of clients, or work directly for a company, there are a few different options. So I think lobbyists move around in that sense. And then I think also, oftentimes lobbyists go back and forth between state government work and the private sector. So oftentimes a lobbyist will get plucked out of their lobbying job by an opportunity to serve in the governor's administration. And, that's a great opportunity for a lobbyist to see and experience policy making from a different perspective. But typically when they're done, or when that, governor's administration is over, they'll go back to lobbying.
Great. And we have another question from Mandira that says, who in the company decides what policy you and your government affairs team should pursue for BI? Does it come from the top, or does your team determine what policy to pursue more independently?
That's a really good question. So it's a mix. I think overarching policy of, what kind of company we want to be and what we want to get involved in will certainly come from the top. The details of, for example, a bill to require more transparency of biopharma companies, that will originate from us, which includes the policy team and the federal team, and we will make a recommendation to our leadership saying, we think this policy should be modified, or we think we should support it, or we think we should oppose it, and get their buy-in that way. The other way decisions are made are through trade organizations. So there is a trade group called Pharma, and there's a trade group called Bio, and we work with both of them very closely. And they also have policy staff that analyze bills. And sometimes we rely very heavily on their analysis. And the goal there is to keep us together as an industry, so that when we provide feedback to legislators, they hear, a singular, strong voice from the biopharma industry, as opposed to 20 or 30 different companies all having a slightly different take on a bill. So the response kind of is developed in a number of different channels, depending on the issue, but that's typically how it's done.
That's great. Thank you. if anyone has any other questions, please submit them now. At the moment, it looks like we have exhausted the questions that have been posed. There have been some really good ones, and if I don't see any further, I want to thank you, Jennifer. I think that's been very enlightening, and you've shared a lot of information for some budding lobbyists or people who are just curious about the industry in general. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, A Day in the Life of a Government Affairs Professional at Boehringer Ingelheim. You've truly shared some insight on opportunities in Connecticut and beyond, and we greatly appreciate the time you took to share. This webinar is a part of an ongoing webinar series on careers in bioscience produced by BioCT in partnership with the UConn Center for Career Development. The next webinar in this series is scheduled for April 16th at 3 p.m., A Day in the Life of a Computational Biologist, where we'll hear from a panel of speakers from Jackson Laboratory for Genomic Medicine, led by Dr. Dugu Ukar. Please regularly check BioCT's event calendar at bioct.org/events, sign up for BioCT news alerts, and/or the UConn Center for Career Development's calendar at career.uconn.edu/events for more information about upcoming webinars. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of BioCT, the UConn Center for Career Development, and Jennifer Hers and BI, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day.